Even with stars like Josh Hoover and Eric McAlister, the beginning of every TCU game is beginning to feel like the different day, but the same.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? I am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, host of your favorite daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, but you probably know it better as the Locked On Horned Frog podcast. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day and making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the country. We'll close out today's episode with a look at PFF, surprisingly, in my opinion, saying that TCU's game versus BYU was not their worst performance of the season. Segment 2, we'll get into a dive about Eric McAlister because I don't feel like his season is being talked about enough for a variety of reasons, but we are going to rectify that today. But this whole thing kicks off with probably the most concerning trend about TCU. I took a breath for a second. I took a beat for a second because maybe you just clicked on this episode. You didn't read the title. And I wonder what was the disastrous cycle that maybe you thought we were here to talk about. Was it Sonny Dykes? Was it Kendall Briles? Was it something offensive related? I think everybody's looking at one side of the ball. But I'll tell you what, TCU's inability to get off of the ground in the first quarter is a disastrous cycle that is too late to say if they don't fix is going to ruin their season. It already has ruined their season, in my opinion. It's put a real negative connotation on the latter games in 2025. They say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And apparently if it is broke, don't fix it either. That's the theory in Fort Worth. Or maybe they just can't fix it. I don't know. But one thing I'll say, this is extremely concerning to have players like Josh Hoover, like Eric McAlister, and still consistently not be able to get off the ground in the first quarter. The Frogs have scored 0 points. You heard me right now. 0 points in 5 of the last 6 games in the first quarter. And when you look at players like Hoover, like McAlister, like Dwyer, I don't think the run game has been great, but we see there's talent in the backfield. When you start looking at the issues that TCU has, you begin to question, is it talent? Is it scheme? Is it talent? Is it the people calling plays? Those are typically the two ways that we go. Is this a team that doesn't have the talent? Or is this a team that is not utilizing their talent the best way? Because we have to find something that's wrong. We have to be able to point our finger to something, even if it's a mix of both. We have to be able to point our finger to something. And I think that the offensive line, which has been a concern from a talent standpoint, plays second fiddle to just the inability to curate a strong first 15 plays. The first 15 plays, that first quarter, it's all about scripted. That beginning of the first quarter, at least, is about scripted plays. So why is it that you can't get anything going there? And the reason I say that is the first thing and not the offensive line, which is a talent question, is because they do tend to figure it out in the second quarter. So like you'll go BYU, 0 points. Come back and you score 10 points. Against Iowa State, you just didn't play well either one. You had 0, and then you came back with 3 points, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 3 points in the second quarter. So you just didn't start that game well. You didn't finish that game well. You just played that game poorly. West Virginia was the one game in which you did score first quarter points. You had 10 and then 10, first and second quarter. Then you have Baylor, no points, but you dropped 21 points in the second quarter. Right? Kansas State, no points. Colorado, no points. You come back against Colorado and you drop 14. Against Kansas State, you drop 7. So you're seeing a little bit of an improvement. That's the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games. That's the last month and a half. For the last month and a half, TCU has been absolutely incapable of curating offense in the first quarter. The second quarter has been their happy place. They couldn't figure out, matter of fact, they couldn't figure out BYU at any point in the game except the second quarter. You go against Baylor, nothing in the first quarter, 21 in the second. You look at games, Colorado, nothing in the first quarter, 14 in the second. Right? Like these are times when you just heat up. The talent is there. I believe in Josh Hoover. I believe in Eric McAlister. I believe in Jordan Dwyer. Right? I believe in DJ Rogers. I believe in the talent that you have here. But the fact that you can't put it together in the first 15 plays. The fact that you can't put it together when things are scripted. Do I want to give you credit for adjustments? Yes. But when you consistently struggle, see, that's the thing. The second quarter has been the happy place for TCU. And if I wanted to look at it optimistically, I could say that's because Kendall Briles knows how to make adjustments. I could say that's because Josh Hoover and his weapons know how to really read the flow of the game. But when you do it so much, when you're required to be in that position so often, it's no longer applauding the adjustments. It's why are you unable to come in with scripted plays that work? Why is the beginning of your game so slow? I think that we allowed them not to score points for a minute. I think we allowed the 21 points versus Baylor to kind of smooth that over. And then you would just end up getting walked by Kansas State. No one's looking at the first quarter. But then you start going and you realize in the last month and a half, TCU has scored 10 points in the first quarter, and all of those points came against West Virginia, a game where we thought they were just going to run away with it. Now, it didn't end up being that way, but I do think that that explains the difference between the level of the two teams stepping into the game. That's the only time that you scored first quarter points, when you're going against what we believed at the time to be an inferior opponent. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable, and that's something that is a huge concern. And in the last 3 games, I think I talked about it yesterday, but in the last 3 games, you have had a constant descent in points scored. In the last 3 games, you have had a constant descent in points scored that is equated to your season low every single week. 23, 17, 14. Now, I don't think it gets much worse this week. I think that you see some sort of bounce back. Maybe you get back into the 20s, right? TCU hadn't scored under 20 points until the last 2 weeks. And what's sad about that is that's the most critical section of their season, the most critical section of their schedule. This is the time when it was make or break. I really don't fault a lot of what TCU did against BYU. I don't really get upset about it. Was it embarrassing? Yeah, to a degree. But I also knew that BYU would come in and handle the team. I thought that they would look a little bit more competent. And that, to me, the turning point of the BYU game was when the Cougars won the second quarter. Mind you, this is what TCU does phenomenally. I don't think that they were the better team. I don't think that they were going to win. But this game felt like, for even a millisecond, that it could be a little bit more competitive, that the game could have ended a little bit closer than it did. But then BYU took all of that momentum out when they won the second quarter. They outscored TCU 17-10, but it's not the 17. It's the 3 that came at the end of the game, or at the end of the quarter, excuse me. If it was 14-10, it would have felt okay because TCU drove down. They had a little bit of momentum. They scored with 1:14 left. The problem is they scored with 1:14 left. And BYU, who has been slicing up the TCU defense all day long, and that didn't stop after this, they came down and scored a field goal. And you have to convince me otherwise. The only reason it was a field goal was because time was running out. That moment right there, though, let's play the graphic. You know I love my graphics.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
Now, ignore half of that. I don't know if it's won or lost in that moment. It was just competitive or uncompetitive in that moment. But that was the turning point because TCU's happy place, TCU's best time of the game is minutes 15 to 30. It is the second quarter right before halftime, specifically right before halftime. And BYU came in when TCU felt like they had all of this momentum. They're going to get the ball first in the third quarter. Oh, this is our time to close the gap. BYU said, not so fast, my friend. You left us 1:14. We're going to easily, not even methodically, we are going to easily move down the field, score a field goal. And it felt like all of the energy was gone. Did I feel like in that moment that TCU could win? No, I didn't. I felt like BYU was the clear better team, and I never felt that changed during the day. Or the night, really, because that was a late game. But I didn't feel like that changed at any point. But I did feel like maybe TCU could have made this a 10-point game. A 10-point game. Instead of losing by 31, I believe the final score was. I think it was 44-13. All we can do is sigh. Can't afford to fire Sonny Dykes, too broke, huh? That's what they say. Can't afford to fire Sonny Dykes, too broke. The only reason I clicked this, not because it was related to our segment, or kind of is, everything feels like it comes back down to coaching. Everything feels like it comes back down to coaching. Sometimes you're going to have to swallow the pill. I don't know if that ends up being this year or not. Don't know what the buyout is or not. But when talking about Sonny Dykes and what he brings and what he has taken from the program, it feels like he has brought success early and he has taken hope as of late. So I understand if you're saying too broke. I don't know exactly what that buyout is. But at some point, you begin to swallow the pill. James Franklin had a crazy buyout. Brian Kelly had a crazy buyout. Sometimes you just swallow the pill and find out if you can take it. So let's move forward, though. Let's move forward. Thank you for that woof, 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 Dago, I believe is how it's said. Dago? I don't know. Woof, woof. But let's push forward. Let's push forward because even though TCU has been bad, Eric McAlister has had a quietly great year. And that's an emphasis on quiet because I don't think enough people are talking about it. But let's change that as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And if you need a little extra way to make money on a sport that you know the best, pick the sport and pick FanDuel. It's simple. It's easy. It's quick. It's fun. It's fun. And matter of fact, it's rewarding if you're new to FanDuel. Put down a $5 bet. If you're new, this is only for new customers. Put down a $5 bet. And if you win, you get $300 back in bonus bets. And then you can go get risky. Then you can be like, I don't know how I feel about this bet, so let's just throw it out there. Then you finally get that opportunity. I'll put $5 down on the easiest thing possible. Patrick Mahomes completions. After that, I'm going to get risky. I'm going to go Josh Allen touchdowns because we don't know what that'll look like this week. It was 6 last week. Ooh, ooh, ooh. That's the same noise and the same reaction I have when my FanDuel hits. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Look what I just did this Sunday. And you could be the same. Go ahead and download FanDuel today. Get the app and take advantage of your $300 back in bonus bets. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. TCU hasn't been that good, but Eric McAlister has been underratedly great. And if you are in the circles that speaks about how good that Eric McAlister is, please send those circles my way. If you are in regions, if you are in conversations with people who are championing how McAlister has played this year, please tag me. Please let me know because I don't feel like enough people are talking about it. And I understand why. TCU is in the midst of a season that, quite frankly, has disappointed the fan base. They are in the midst of a season that all the conversation, especially over the last 3 or so weeks, has been centered around whether or not you could fire this coach, whether or not you should fire this coach. It's been centered around, man, this season hasn't gone the way that Sonny Dykes said it would. Man, what kind of bowl game are we going to be in? I think in general, since the Kansas State game, this has been a season that has been really marked by disappointment and sadness, and everybody is focused on the negative. Even talks around Josh Hoover, in my opinion, I've seen a couple of times, hey, if Josh Hoover left, I bet he'd do this, that, and the third. It's not even about what Josh Hoover can grow to be in the upcoming season. It's about what he would do if he left TCU. Everything around the Horned Frogs right now feels negative. But there is a huge shining light, and his name is Eric McAlister, and we see him every single week. And despite the consistency that he has displayed week in and week out, still doesn't feel like enough people are talking about how great that this season has been. And he was recently named as a semifinalist for the Biletnikoff Award for the best wide receiver in the country. You end up having to narrow that down to 3, and I think it's going to be really tough. I don't know if he's able to crack that 3. You're going to have guys who, quite frankly, you're going to have some names in there. And I'm not saying that these guys haven't deserved it, especially because, they have more team success. But I think Eric McAlister is having one of the best seasons. And if he is one of those final 3, it wouldn't be shocking. I think the lack of success for TCU may take him out of the running. Because last year, you had Travis Hunter, who was the freaking All-American. Heisman. You had Tedoroa McMillan. I don't think Arizona was that good. So maybe it's not going to be that big a deal. And you had Nick Nash from San Jose State. And that's San Jose State. But this, you got Jeremiah Smith, you got Carnell Tate, you got some guys from some big names who we all knew coming into the season with teams that are doing, pretty well. I think that McAlister is one of the guys who deserves a spot, though. And that says a lot to me. That says a lot. Of the 13 finalists, semifinalists, he deserves to be one of the three or in the conversation with all of the names and all of the big schools and all of the success that these guys have had. I think it says a lot. And TCU's game notes really gave some interesting stats. So I want to read these because these came from TCU's game notes. And it does a really good job of explaining just how good that Eric McAlister has been in 2025. They say Eric McAlister was just the third FBS player in the last 30 years to have at least 500 yards receiving, 7 touchdown catches, and 25 yards per reception through the first 6 games of a season. He's a deep ball threat who's extremely consistent. And in my opinion, you don't see those a lot. To me, typically, if you are a deep specialist, and I know that he can do the catch and run, but he's just a walking explosive play. Maybe that's the better way to say it. Maybe to compare him to a guy who just stretches the field would be unfair because you see he's a bigger body guy. He's not a small speedster who's just going to try to hit you over 40 yards downfield. He's a guy who can catch and run. We saw that against BYU where he caught a hitch route, made a move and ran down the field for over 40 yards. He has the ability to just run downfield on 9, right down the field. You pick and choose, but he is an explosive play no matter how the ball gets to him. And that's my favorite thing about Eric McAlister. My favorite thing about McAlister is if you want to give him the ball short, he can run and go get it. If you want to run or give him the ball deep down the field, air yards, he can do that too. And I don't think that a lot of times he gets spoken about in that way. Then another stat they gave is that McAlister leads all P4 receivers with 111.9 receiving yards per game against P4 competition. They said the next closest is 105.3. 105.3. Sorry. So you're looking at that. You're looking at nationwide ranks. He's 941 yards. That puts him at 6th in the country in yards per game, 6th in the country in yards total, right? And what's most impressive is that he didn't really play that Arizona State game. Technically, he did. So he has 10 games on his resume. But at the same time, he has 13 snaps versus Arizona State. He was injured. He was basically a non-factor. And I think he was significantly hampered against Colorado as well. So you're seeing a 65-yard performance against the Buffs. But I think that a healthy McAlister probably could have gave you 80 to 90, maybe even crossed that century mark. But, it's just not the way that it broke down. When it comes to Eric McAlister, if you take out that Arizona State game, in which he barely played, right? Like he barely played that game. It's not like he got shut down. He played 13 snaps while being injured. You're looking at an even greater yards per game. You're looking at you're looking at 4th, right? By like 0.3, like 300ths or 3/10. Math almost got me. At 3/10 of a yard. The one guy is at 104.8. And McAlister will be at 104.55. I think I did the math and it said that. So you're looking at a great season from a comparison of what he's done against his peers. Right? If you compare Eric McAlister in 2025 versus his peers, you're looking at somebody who ranks high, someone who's top 10 in a couple of statistical categories. You're looking at a big play machine, whether the ball gets in his hands short and he has to run, or if he's just going over the top and stretching the field that way. You're looking at a guy who is leading the conference in yards per catch, a guy who I think leads the conference in yards per game and total yards. This is a big time player, but let's not compare him only to what he's doing with his peers in 2025. What about what he's done in comparison to TCU legends, to people who have had big time seasons all time? So this was another stat that came from the TCU game notes. Beating Josh Dotson is going to be tough. 13-27 is going to be tough. Not impossible, because TCU has 2 games left and they'll go to a bowl game. And he just needs to average about 130 yards per game. It's not easy, but it's doable. It is doable. Let me say that. Especially if TCU has to play catch up in one of these games, or if they just love to throw the football. So you don't even have to play catch up, to be honest. But let's say he doesn't get to number 1, because that's nearly 400 yards away from him. 48 yards from being 8th. He's currently 9th all time in season single season receiving yards. He's 48 yards away from being 8th, 58 yards away from 7th, 72 from 6th, 77 from 5th. Now, I predict that at worst, he will have 77 yards in this upcoming game, and he will jump into the top 5. I don't think that's a bold prediction, but my prediction is that by the end of this week, you will see Eric McAlister in the top 5 all time for TCU receiving yards in a single season. With 94, he could jump to 4th. With 121, he could jump to 3rd. And I talk about averaging 130. That's about how much he needs. He needs 129 in order to get to 2nd place. With a huge game, we could see Eric McAlister jump into the top 5, top 3, maybe even top 2. And if he gets to the top 2 this week, we're going to have to be on serious watch, because I would assume he's not a guaranteed first rounder. He's a guy who is going to step into the bowl game and probably play, try to boost his stock a little bit. I'm just saying. I think there's a chance that with a really strong, it's like treated like this. Eric McAlister is near 400 yards away from the all-time record for receiving yards in a single season for TCU. 400 yards away, a little less than that, but 400 yards away if we're rounding. He has 3 games left to do it. He's going to need 130. I know that math doesn't work with the rounding, but it does with the actual number. If he comes in, let's treat it like a 4th quarter drive or 2nd quarter drive at the end of the 2nd quarter. If you treat it like the end of the first half when you don't know if you're going to try to go get points and you do a little play, all right, cool, they got enough yards, we're going to go get it. That's how I look at Eric McAlister. If he gets enough yards in this game, might try to push. You don't have much going for you this season. Getting him a record like that feels out of reach, could be a way to end the season happily. But let's move forward, because they said that this wasn't the worst game by TCU this year. We're going to be very brief. PFF. Oof, I don't know if I agree, but let's see what they think as we continue with Locked on Horned Frogs. As we continue rolling and wrapping up today's episode of Locked on Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Surprisingly, PFF doesn't think that this was TCU's worst game of the season. Who would have thought? They don't think that this was the worst game. I'll say this, it definitely felt like the worst game to me. It definitely felt like the worst game that they had played this season to me. It was the game. The thing about it is it feels like the worst game because you were never in it, but it was also the best team you played. So, PFF, I don't think grades based like that. It just felt like you were absolutely dominated and outclassed in every single area. What I will say is that PFF agrees with me that it was the worst game for the defense. And maybe that is part of it, because the offense has had bad games. But this is the first time that offense and defense have played terribly. You can look at the Kansas State game, which Kansas State is the game in which they say TCU did play the worst. That was the worst game they said they played, because it was the worst offensive game. And up to this point, it was the worst defensive game. It's the only other time that PFF has graded the TCU defense in the 60s. So you're looking at 70s all the way around. I think they never crept out of the 70s, but they were in the 60s against Kansas State, 64.7. They were in the 60s against West Virginia, 69.1. And these are times when I don't really always agree. I don't think that the defense played that bad against Kansas State, at least not early. They did kind of fall down late, but I don't think they played that bad early. Then you look at 69.1 against West Virginia. I don't think that the defense played bad at all. I think that when the game was closing out, when the game was reaching the point where you're like, all right, man, this is over, then they began to get some yards on them, and it made it close, and it made it a little bit concerning. But it felt like, you know what, West Virginia wasn't coming back in this game. And had that Baylor matchup not happened recently, I probably wouldn't even think twice about how they played at the end of the West Virginia game. So I don't know if I agree with the gradings that PFF has, but they say that this is not the worst game. 65.1 is the overall grade. They had 64.7 against Kansas State. So that's a really small margin. That's 0.4 of a grade. So you're not looking at a big difference. When I say it's not the worst, okay, it almost sounds subjective. It almost sounds like pick a side, to be honest. But Arizona State kind of surprised me. Arizona State was in the 70s. Now, granted, they thought the defense played well that game. They thought the defense played pretty well that game. But the offense had a 62.2, and they actually said that the offense played better against Arizona State than they did BYU. they thought they played better than they did against West Virginia. Oh, no, sorry. Better than they did against Kansas State. And this is really the point I want to land on. So let's move away from the exact grades for a second. I found something interesting when I was curious about why this BYU game was better than the TCU versus Arizona State game. And what I saw is that they thought that they blocked better versus Arizona State. I said, really? Now you let me know what you think. But what PFF says, and this was so surprising to me, is that surprisingly, you weren't under pressure that much against Arizona State. So one thing about me, if it doesn't make sense, I do try to get to the bottom of it. Like, what's going on here? When I saw a better blocking grade for TCU versus BYU, or excuse me, TCU versus Arizona State than I did against BYU, and it was a decent margin. Let me make sure I got this correct. So against Arizona State, the pass block was a 50.7. I was like, okay, that feels appropriate. But then against BYU, it's a 70.7. And I'm like, 20? You're telling me that it was 20 points better versus BYU when I feel like they were equally as bad? I talked about the Kansas State BYU overall grades and how they were 4/10 apart. That's what I expected. Maybe you would say that the BYU game was better, but what made the difference is that Arizona State actually did not have Josh Hoover under pressure that often. That was surprising to me. Against Arizona State, Josh Hoover was only under pressure 9 times out of 31 dropbacks, or out of 40 dropbacks, excuse me. So that was only about 20 some odd, I think 22.5% of the time that he was under pressure. The problem is every time he was under pressure, it affected them. Every single time. They had 9 dropbacks, only got 1 pass off. They had 2 scrambles and 6 sacks. That was the issue. And that's why it feels way worse. Because against BYU, Josh Hoover dropped back 31 times in this game, and he was under pressure 16 times. Literally half. You can't have an even split, so one had to be one up. Literally half of the time that Josh Hoover dropped back versus BYU, he was under pressure. And you simply will never win a game like that. If you drop back 31 times and you are under pressure 16 of those 31, you will never win a game. And it probably won't be close. I'll be honest with you. If your quarterback drops back 31 times, it's under pressure 16, I'm not going to stop giving those numbers. I need that to be ingrained in your mind. 31, 16. If that was any game, you are probably losing by a wide margin. You can't run the football consistently. And when you drop back, you're under pressure half of the time. No quarterback can exist in those conditions. I thought that Hoover did a really good job being mobile. It's because he had to. Josh Hoover did a good job moving in this game, and sometimes you forget how he can move. But I hate that you had to see it. There's a big difference between showing your mobility and flashing it in times. You're only going to do it when you need to do it. We never want to see Josh Hoover doing that as much as he was on Saturday. Anyway, let's keep pushing. Tomorrow, we'll have Sarah Smith on the show, and I have a question for you, question for me, question for her. What would it take to have a satisfactory end to the season? If the answer is nothing, then the answer is nothing. But I'm going to try to find an answer for tomorrow. I appreciate you. I'll see you tomorrow. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.